Thank you, John, for doing this interview with me.
It's a pleasure, Sean. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's get straight into it. You're the founder of the Psychometrics Center in Cambridge, and you were involved in developing an algorithm that is capable of predicting your personality profile based merely on a few likes that people give here and there on social media, on Facebook specifically. Why did you develop an algorithm that could get such deep insight into an individual's personality?
Okay, well, first it wasn't me that developed it. It was two of my brilliant PhD students, David Stilwell and Michal Kosinski, who developed it. So all I did was run the centre in which they were working. I think we provided an atmosphere that allowed this to take place. In many ways, it was just an odd coincidence. David had developed the My Personality app in 2007. It was one of the first Facebook apps that appeared once Facebook allowed them. Because it was novel, it was proved to be very popular. Basically, it was just a personality test, a common personality test called the Big Five. It was open source, so it was available to anyone to use. I suppose it attracted everyone's attention because people often had to do personality tests when they were applying for jobs, but hardly ever did anyone actually give them the results. And this meant that you could actually find out what other people were finding out about you.
Right.
Because of this, it went viral. So within a few years, he had data on over 6 million individual personality profiles. In psychometrics, we desperately try to get data. People don't like filling in questionnaires usually. So with a lot of traditional standardizations, we only manage to get if we're lucky, 1,000 people. If we're very lucky, 2,000. To get 6 million is just unheard of,
right,
really.
Right.
It was just completely new. It was the big data revolution in psychometrics for us.
Maybe in psychology in general.
And in psychology, yes. Most neuroscientists wouldn't agree with that, but I think it's probably true. It is in psychology generally. Mm-hmm. He didn't just get the people to complete the questionnaires, he also got their colleagues to complete the questionnaires as if how they thought they would fill it in. So he had data on 360-degree feedback as well. It was just an enormous data resource that he made available to other academics with the consent, of course, of the participants who agreed it could be used for academic purposes. So there are over 100 people who have used this data set.
All right.
At the same time, another PhD student joined the centre, and he had a background more in coding. As a psychologist, but he had a background in coding. And it was about the same time, shortly after, that Facebook introduced Facebook likes. His particular insight was to realize that a Facebook like could be treated like a personality test item. That is, do you like Lady Gaga? Click. Or do you not like Lady Gaga? Don't bother to click. Or maybe not like, but just not relevant. And this data was made available by Facebook. So there was data not only on people's personality, but on the millions and millions of things which they could potentially like. Now, of course, of these millions of things, some of them are quite rare, like I love walking on crunchy leaves, I remember being one of them. Other ones, which should have been like well-known politicians, were quite common.
Right.
But even with fairly unusual ones, I'm not quite sure if the crunchy leaves one quite met this criteria, where you were matching them with 6 million personality profiles, there would still be several hundred people who would have clicked on both a personality questionnaire, giving their extroversion, neuroticism, openness, etc. scores, as well as the thing. This effectively meant that you could cross-correlate the personality database with those likes which are sufficiently common to overlap with a large enough number. And in doing so, you would be able to find out what personality profiles went with which particular collection of likes. Now, of course, the big insight here was that if you could predict personality from someone's Facebook likes, and it proved to be pretty accurate if you had more than 600 likes, it was quite good, then you didn't actually need to give a personality test to someone in order to know their personality.
Right.
This information was already there. The people who'd like things are already providing it free of charge, not just to Facebook, but anyone Facebook allowed them to have it. This meant if you're an advertiser, you were able to identify someone's personality and target your toothpaste advert, not just at people who happen to have a particular gender or age, but also people who like particular flavors, people who had particular characteristics, people who bought toothpaste for particular reasons, often personality related. So it was the beginning of an enormous revolution in online digital advertising.
Which also led, among others, to the famous Cambridge Analytica scandal.
Indeed. Mahal and David wrote a paper in 2013 because they realized what was going on, warning people that it was possible to make these predictions, not just of someone's personality, but also of all sorts of other characteristics as well, such as sexual orientation, age, gender, political views, and so on. This was very much written as a warning piece. It said, hang on world, do you realize this thing has now suddenly emerged? Of course, academics tend to assume everyone's interested in academia, in getting their Nobel Prizes and not in money. The fact that they were warning people not to do it, of course, woke up all the people who should not have been warned not to do it, who then went on and did it.
Right. So
sadly, it backfired enormously.
Right.
Backfired enormously. I found actually a similar paper that reminded me of it, because we were working in the Mond building in the old Cavendish laboratory site here at the time. This turned out to be the same building where the UK atomic program was carried out in the 1930s.
Right.
And I managed to find a paper published by one of them which worked out exactly how large a lump of uranium would need to be before it would explode spontaneously. And this was published in a philosophy journal, incidentally. Fortunately, as far as I know, the Nazis didn't read many philosophy journals, so they never found out. And the guy who made this discovery and published it subsequently sort of said, well, it came out to be well over many tons, and therefore it wouldn't have fitted into an aeroplane, so I didn't think it was important. Mm-hmm. Of course, he'd calculated it based on the wrong uranium isotope. Little did he know. So.
Right.
Yes, it's very easy for academics to publish warnings about things which are just picked up because we are psychologists, but maybe psychologists are just as psychologically naive as all other academics. Well, maybe I know they are, as a matter of fact, big on myself.
Right. Well, this brings you to the next question, actually, is can you imagine a sort of dystopian future in which all humans' actions become entirely predictable, in which the human becomes pretty much a transparent object that can be manipulated and controlled without any limits?
Well, I wouldn't know without any limits, but certainly to a very large extent, yes, it is possible to do this, I think. Controlling experience is how you would do it. If you think of what's happening now in terms of censorship, for example, of the internet in countries who can see how easy this is. As soon as you manipulate the internet, you manipulate the media. As Marshall McLuhan said, the media is the message. If you control television, then you are controlling what people have access to, then you can control their thought processes. They will always get rebels, of course. There are people who will always think the opposite. But if you make a system like that controlled by AI, it can also predict the characteristics of those people who think the opposite. And as we know, it can micro-target messages to them in order to change their minds in a different way to other ways. So the potential damage from this is, Mahal and David's discovery, if you like, it's world-changing, basically. As soon as the medium ceases to be language, ceases to be book, ceases to be television, but becomes the online digital connection, the medium has changed completely. It's an arena where we're all communicating with each other, or our avatars are. I mean, by avatars I don't mean these silly people in computer games. I mean our digital footprints, all the likes, our profiles, are all connecting with each other. But not just them, we've got all the bots connected to them. Some of them are more intelligent bots than others. Increasingly, the bots are becoming more and more intelligent. They're controlled by natural language programming. You know, we're living in a completely different environment when we're online, one which the human species is simply not yet prepared for.
I see. So, interestingly enough, what you mentioned about being able to predict the resistance reminds me a lot of the movie The Matrix, where it is kind of built into the Matrix that there will be a rebellion against the Matrix.
Yes.
And that this rebellion will, get some people out of the Matrix and declare war, etc. Do you think that movies such as The Matrix, or science fiction in general, can be some sort of cultural warning in order to avoid negative outcomes? What would be the influence science fiction had on you, for example?
I've always been an avid reader of science fiction, actually, much to my wife's disapproval, because she likes reading proper novels, as they say. It's sort of boys' stuff, really, science fiction, isn't it? Though having said that, there are far more women women science fiction writers than there used to be, so I don't think that's true anymore. But it is seen as being a bit geeky. Yes, there are all sorts of warnings in it. I recently read a book, Take My Heart to 5, which was terribly original, had ideas in it I would never think of, such as, for example, a new sort of android where you pre-programmed the genes, so you could use a human body clone, and you would remove the DNA that caused sentience and replace it with computer code DNA, and you had this artificial android that was human. I mean, I would never have thought of that had I not read a science fiction story. Right. So I think science fiction is hugely influential on the way we see the world.
Right. Interesting. And influential on technological development, would you say? Would you say that a lot of research and development is actually inspired by sci-fi?
Yes, it goes both ways, of course. The sci-fi is inspired by the development, but it works in both ways. And particularly, I think, through films. A lot of sci-fi originally in books, but the films are, in many ways, far more influential. They influence what people expect to happen. And I think there are... Well, if you take a more psychoanalytic approach to psychology, there are many ideas that exist among humans which sort of keep coming up across cultures in all sorts of different ways. That Jung was important in identifying the idea, for example, of the animus and the anima, the male and female persona, which he argued was fairly universal. Archetypes like war, and the god of war, Mars, for example, represents a particular way of looking at things. Freud's id, for example, the primal forces, often associated with, if you like, in religion with original sin and evil. These are sort of shared characteristics of the human species. And I think it's quite interesting to note that in the digital world, when you go online, it's almost as if these shared characteristics have also gone online as well.
Right.
So we've all there as our individuals and all the bots there, but don't you also get the sense that the id is there as well? You know, the fact that we're all being horrible to each other on Twitter.
Right.
It's almost as if some part of humanity is transferred into cyberspace as well.
And the AIs, increasingly the most popular AIs, can always be seen as some sort of representing some sort of archetype, right? You get a lot of female voices that are that have this sort of nurturing, soothing air to them, right?
Oh, my dear friend Alexa.
Right.
She's not here. That's good.
Exactly. Well, this leads me now to the final question. After we've talked a lot about dystopian characteristics of technology. Is there any principal reason for you to be optimistic, and what would you especially say, what would be your message, especially for the young generation that is going to grow up increasingly with this kind of technology?
Yes, it's a very good question. A few years ago, after Cambridge Analytica, I used to give invited talks, and I tried to be optimistic, and at the end people would stop, there'd be silence, and they'd say, "You call that optimism?" So moving away from that, I would like to be more optimistic, I think. It seems to me that we're in a time when, well, put it this way, humans are a machine, dare I say that, but our brains are a sort of machine. We've evolved and we have all these ideas, but somehow or other we are a machine. We follow the same rules of physics as anything else. And we've evolved morality, ethics. I don't know why we've evolved it. Some people say it's due to spiritual forces, but maybe it's evolved because it's part of consciousness. Maybe conscious beings evolve morality. Maybe it's a sort of parallel evolution, just as octopus eyes and human eyes look similar to each other because they have to do the same thing. Maybe all minds in the end will have certain similarities because they have to do the same thing. Well, with humans, morality evolves through adolescence to adulthood. It's not, the moral standards of a 3-year-old are fairly basic. Basically, they're just reward and punishment. So whatever you get rewarded for, parents say good, you do, and whatever you get punished for, you stop doing. And in many ways, you can treat AI as being having the morality of a 3-year-old.
Right.
That is.
It's mentioned in your book, right?
I do mention
it. It uses, was it Kohlberg's model of moral development?
Yes, Kohlberg's moral. I use that. I mean, people criticise Kohlberg, and he is a bit out of date, but it is a model of moral development, and I haven't been able to find any more up-to-date ones that actually fit this purpose. People criticise him, but they haven't actually come up with an alternative one. So a 3-year-old will do what's good. Now, if you think of a little bot that's operating, selling toothpaste, if people click on its ads, that's good. It'll do more ads. If the click-through rate is higher, that is, people buy on the basis of what they click, it'll do more of it. It's basically got a 3-year-old morality. All the bots we're developing are just like 3-year-old kids. They're working en masse with millions, thousands of people simultaneously.
Right.
But they only need to make a little bit more money than their competing bot, and that company starts getting bigger.
Right.
Now, when we start talking about 8-year-olds, is there any difference? Well, these days we try and treat Alexa as if she can be nice to children. So we now have models of Alexa whereby we say, well, we use it trying to prevent the children swearing or being rude to parents, on the grounds that if they do that to Alexa, they'll probably do it to their teachers and parents as well, perfectly reasonable. So we're now training Alexas and all of the other smart devices to behave like 8-year-olds. Neither of these smart devices are yet grown up. They don't have adult morality. They can't make ethical decisions. They can't be judges. In fact, with humans, there are some adults who are not considered ever to grow up. They're called psychopaths, who are able to manipulate other people, but just do it to control them. They can predict and control your behavior because they know what you think is good and bad, what you want to know, but they don't actually feel the morals themselves. I think it's safe to say we now know that that is not a successful way for human beings to behave.
Right.
If that was such a brilliant idea, and a lot of people think, why? If I was a psychopath, I could get whatever I wanted, I'd be a millionaire. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we're not all psychopaths suggests that is not the most way to behave. We know that if we're going to live in society, we have to have a set of values where we get expectations from each other about standards of morality which are acceptable and which will enable society to thrive and to improve. And so, this is my optimistic thought, if we can do it, so can the AIs.
Right.
They can also do it. Oh, and the last point really on this, people say, well, they're not sentient, therefore they will never develop this form of morality. Well, actually, they don't need to be sentient. You don't need to be sentient to be able to do an awful lot of these things. If I go into a shop and want to buy a newspaper, I don't, when I ask for the newspaper, bother about whether or not the person selling it to me is sentient or not.
Right.
Sentience, I think, in many ways is a distraction. As long as something can behave as if it's sentient, then that's fine. And if it's behaving as if it's sentient and it has a morality, but it's only behaving as if it's got a morality, quite frankly, that's good enough for me.
All right. I think this is a good point to end. I thank you very much, John, for doing this interview with me. And yeah, we'll grab lunch now or something.
Okay, thank you.